Shark attacks are rare, yet to any sea enthusiast the possibility is terrifying. How would you react if a shark appeared while you swam alone? Instead of panicking, could you remain calm, meet its gaze, and slowly retreat? These precautions allow people to enjoy the ocean's expanse with a sense of security. Swimming in groups and staying aware minimizes risks, enabling everyone to savor the sea's soothing embrace. Here are 6 stories that explore the delicate balance between fear and fascination with the ocean's depths. It was summer in 2015, and Alyssa Montgomery was standing on the shoreline of a sunlit Gansbaai in South Africa, a place famous for its coastline and is one of the best shark cage diving hotspots. Gansbaai, snuggled in by the rough cliffs and the vast Atlantic Ocean, had often put into the mouth of many the phraseology "great white shark capital of the world." Waters mask the unpredictable temperament of the ocean and its daunting inhabitants. Alyssa, an adventurous 25-year-old traveler from Canada, has been exploring the vast landscapes of South Africa for almost a month now. Armed with the latest camera phone, she seeks the perfect shot anytime. That day, Kleinbaai Beach hosted a completely different set of people. Alyssa positioned herself on the beach and took in the moment. She'd planned this moment, the perfect selfie with the bright ocean as the backdrop. She waded into the shallows where the calmer waters lapped at her legs, before adjusting her phone just a little bit to catch the perfect light. Waves were softly crashing all around her, but she felt blissfully unaware of what lay beneath the surface. Unknown to Alyssa, though, great white sharks shared her excited embrace of the waters and had been cruising close to shore, lured by the excitement of the swimmers on the beach. With stealth and power, the great shark dominated his territory, the abyssal canyon that offered infinite advantage to its predator, which remained concealed in the darkness that covered swimmers above. As Alyssa prepared to frame her picture, a vast shadow raced beneath her and increased speed. Just as she was about to react, a great white shark lunged out of the blue, opening its jaws. Its world, which was bursting around her when the shark hit her, knocked her off her feet and took her below the surface. She felt a sharp grip of panic as the shark's teeth sank deep into her leg, and the atmosphere on the beach changed instantly. Sunbathers nearby screamed, and their laughter turned into shrieks of horror. The lifeguards instantly reacted, and their training kicked in as they ran for the rough surf. One of the men, who happened to be a tall bloke named Mark Tomp, had been watching Alyssa from his lofty perch and had observed the shark swimming in for the kill. He knew time was of the essence. Mark dove into the water, his heart pounding. He could feel everybody else's panic and hear their screams as he swam toward the splashing. The water was dark and murky, and with terrible visibility that was nearly nothing. He swam ahead, focusing on the commotion. He needed to get to Alyssa in time. Other lifeguards with flotation devices and water rescue boards joined the line Mark led through the angry waves. Alyssa was struggling helplessly against the firm hold of the shark. Panic set in. She reacted violently for release, the sensation of fear and unreality racing in her mind as she had come to South Africa to experience a new life, not to become another victim of probably the most dreaded predator in the ocean. Just when she thought she was getting weak, she heard the splashing above and the voices calling out her name and shouting from the lifeguards, telling her to keep calm. Mark approached where Alyssa had disappeared into the water, his head looking desperately. He could see the shark appearing as a dark silhouette in the blue, and at that moment Mark knew he was in for it. He revved and made an enormous sweep closer to her to assess how he could help. He hoped the other lifeguards would hear his calls and come in, thinking they would all have to make some attempt to scare away the shark. The commotion brought about by the sudden movement above caused the shark to let go. Suddenly, Alyssa was jolted and started kicking out wildly, going to the surface and gasping for some precious air. And now, right before her was Mark. She could see his determined face slicing through the chaos. She reached out, her fingers brushed his arm, but the shark wasn't done. It twisted about, its bulky body propelled by the water with an unnatural, macabre fluidity. Mark's eyes dilated as he saw the shark coming around yet again. He caught hold of Alyssa's arm, pulling her toward him, shouting for her to swim hard. They had to make it to the safety of that beach. Other lifeguards scrambled into the struggle, bringing rescue boards and anything they could grab to beat the predator off. It hesitated once they closed in and knew it had become a threat. It seemed to ponder its next move momentarily, allowing that much room for Alyssa and Mark. Mark and Alyssa staggered onto the shore in this last heave of persistent effort, where the sand under their feet seemed to afford some safety. The lifeguard swarmed in quickly upon the two children from the sea, yelling at the shark and gesticulating with arms and boards, hoping these actions would somehow repel the shark. The creature, outmatched on all sides, slowly resigned to the deep water, and the shadow withdrew, marking the reduction in this creature's menace. The leisure sound was replaced by the symphony of sirens and voices showing concern. Alyssa collapsed onto the sand. Her heart was thumping and adrenaline surged into her veins. Looking at her wounds, Mark bent down beside her. Yes, the bite in her leg was deep, but she was alive. She was relieved, yet could not believe everything had come down to this. She was immediately taken for treatment as the ambulance came. The lifeguards did not leave the beach but kept their eyes up on the water, looking to ensure that the episode did not repeat. A sense of vigilance now dimmed the scenario once entire life at the beach, the swimmer bearing in mind that the more bottomless ocean was their new enemy. Though the physical scars of the shark attack would heal, the psychological impact remained. Alyssa found herself with a mix of fears and fascination. Once a source of joy, the ocean now filled her with trepidation. Yet she also recognized the beauty and power of the sea, which for her would forever shape her relationship with the said entity. It was the year 2007 off the coast of Thailand when vibrant coral reefs from various corners of the world called Koh Tao. With its crystalline waters and plentiful underwater life, this small island became a paradise for divers. Koh Tao had a rich history. It had been a paradise for sea turtles, where its name comes from, Turtle Island. As time passed, this became a busy hub for scuba diving, attracting many adventurers looking for underwater discovery excitement. Tommy Grayson was already a pro diver in his early 30s and had visited Koh Tao more than once. He knew the nooks and crannies of the reefs, the bursts of color from the fish streaking across the corals, and the caves that whispered ocean secrets. This day, Tommy went out to dive alone, looking to explore a crevice little known to him and mentioned by other divers. With his diving apparatus, Tommy dipped into the blue. Sunlit water cast bright colors on the coral structures above him. School after school, fish swam around him, their scales flashing in the rays of light like precious stones. An atmosphere of calm swept him down onto the ocean floor. After some time, he noticed a narrow gap between the coral wall, its view blocked slightly by the sway of sea fans. Intrigued by what he saw on the other side, Tommy swam closer to the gap. His heartbeats quickened just at the thought of discovery. The crevice was dark and instead welcoming about adventure. He squeezed into the opening with a thrill of excitement laced with apprehension. The aperture opened wider into a small cavern choked with shadows and the odd flicker of bioluminescent organisms. It was a surreal sight, but Tommy had a quick shift of curiosity to caution. He felt a change in the water, a tension that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. At that moment, Tommy disturbed the peace of the cavern. Out of the shadows, the giant moray leapt, wrenched from sleep. It was thick and muscular in the body, with razor-sharp teeth. Tommy winced as the eel quickly coiled its strong body around his arm and bit deep into the flesh. The pain was sharp and immediate. Tommy pulled and jerked in every direction to break free from the eel's hold. He had no idea. Except now he needed to act fast. He reached for his diving knife with his free hand, which he had always hoped to use only for cutting rope or prying open recalcitrant clams. Now it was a lifeline. The eel thrashed about, its body winding around Tommy's, but Tommy fought on. He had faced many challenges before, none like this. Panic welled up inside him in this cramped little space in the rock. He tried to focus on the reminders of his training. With quick movements, he placed the knife against the eel's powerful jaw. With a deep breath, he pressed the blade into the eel's flesh. It released a surprised hiss, and its grip on him relaxed enough for Tommy to free his arm. He didn't stick around to see if the eel would follow up on the attack and kicked off from the cavern wall, propelling himself toward the opening. The water felt thick with adrenaline, and he swam, his heart pounding. Tommy burst out of the aperture into the open water, gasping. Bright light after the cave darkness didn't make him feel better, yet he was glad it was there. He looked back, expecting the moray eel to appear behind him, but it remained in the shadows of its lair. He floated, shaking at the surface, his body convulsing from the shock. Looking at his arm, which carried the marks of the eel's bite, he found it quite a painful reminder of how much danger he had gotten himself into. The kind, tranquil peace of the ocean had turned to reveal her dark side. His mind raced over the near miss, and the sea, as good as it was most of the time, sure could be nasty when it felt like it. With each dive came risk, and experience alone could not hedge that. When he disembarked, his friend Jaden awaited him at the shore. Jaden looked at Tommy's gloomy face and saw the visible marks of the bites on his arm. What had happened was that the terrified Tommy related the terrible experience, underlining the fact that the attack had been so sudden. Jaden had listened word for word, a mix of disbelief and almost shock on his face. It underscored yet again just how unpredictable the ocean could be, even in familiar settings. The following days were days for soul-searching. Tommy was attracted to the ocean's beauty, but his thoughts were on the giant moray eel. Each time he got into the water after that, it felt like a shiver of apprehension, an ominous omen of what dangers lay beneath the surface. In the end, Tommy Grayson's unexpected meeting with a giant moray eel would prove one of the mile markers in his diving career. He knew in his mind that the open sea was a wonder, but had its terms that were supposed to be clarified and followed. He emerged from such an experience not as a survivor, but as an enlightened diver, much wiser and more cautious, forever changed by the depths of the sea. Emily Rodriguez spent her summer of 2014 in the beautiful scenery of the Florida Keys. With these amazingly transparent waters and brightly colored marine life, this part of the United States has always captured the attention of adventure addicts and nature enthusiasts. An avid kayaker, Emily spent many weekends paddling in her home state's coastal waters, and now most readily embraced this day's adventure. She pushed off from a small beach on Big Pine Key when the sun was high, and a soft breeze blew through the palm fronds. Salty ocean air filled her nostrils, and she felt the rhythm of the small waves against the kayak-like music. As she stroked through the water, Emily reveled in the beauty around her. The vibrant coral reefs below flickered with movement as schools of fish danced in and out of sight. Growing up with reverent respect for the ocean and its creatures, she knew how fragile the balance between man and the sea was. This respect made her vigilant today, though her soul washed over her in quietude. Hours slid by as she paddled deep in thought, and suddenly a shadow caught her eye under the surface. It was huge and moved slowly. Squinting with a racing heart, Emily struggled to see whatever lurked beneath. As the shadow drew closer, she made out the unmistakable shape of a hammerhead shark, the hammer-shaped head and the slick body cutting through the water. The shark seemed curious, maybe territorial, and started swimming in a circle around her kayak. Emily's heart was pounding in her chest. She knew hammerheads were not typically aggressive toward humans, but their size and strength could easily create tension. The shark bumped against the kayak gently, as if trying to investigate this strange object floating on the surface. Emily's serene paddle transformed into a fight-or-flight response. Knowing she had to keep cool, Emily held her paddle tight. She remembered her training, never to panic, splash, or make jerky movements that could further antagonize a predator. She slowly moved her kayak with small, controlled strokes to guide her away from the shark. Each move felt like a gentle dance that required caution and respect. The hammerhead shark circled again, its large, dark eyes focused on her. Her thoughts of safety swirled in her head, but she could not fight off the creepy awe of being so close to such a remarkable creature. She had read about hammerheads, how they hunt and their social behavior, but nothing compared to seeing one in its natural habitat. After some minutes, she began to realize the shark's behavior. It was not an attack. Instead, it was curious or playful. However, she knew very well the thin line between curiosity and aggression. She remembered other kayakers who had experiences with sharks, and those instances scared them off because they had poor judgment in reading animal behavior. Daring not to panic, she would change her strategy. She had already begun to thrash about in a struggle to escape the shark, but started to rethink her idea. She would remain still, her paddle resting quietly in her lap. If the shark were curious, it might lose interest if she did not present herself as a threat. The water around her was still, the sun beating brightly above, casting a shimmering glow on the surface. Minutes stretched on as she remained still. The hammerhead continued circling and occasionally nudged her kayak. With each passing moment, it seemed to lose interest. She felt the tension in her body dissipate. Finally, the shark swam into the deeper waters, leaving Emily to catch her breath after what felt like an eternity. Relief washed over her as she sat in her kayak, her heart still pounding, but now with excitement and not fear. It was a sobering moment to be reminded of how wild and unpredictable the ocean is. She shook her head, chuckling over how close to panic she had come. Instead, she had learned an important lesson about patience and respect for the creatures calling the sea home. As she paddled on, Emily was thinking. She knew many people would never be able to come in close contact, even with a hammerhead shark. She felt privileged and responsible for sharing the ocean waters with such unique wildlife. Her journey tested not only her determination, but also her growing respect for the ocean's secrets. Eventually, Emily returned to land, the sun low on the horizon, stretching across with shades of orange and pink. Her heart still beat quickly from the thrill of the experience, now matched by a feeling of success. She had survived the moment of fear with a story to be passed on, one that would be within the top drawer among friends and fellow kayakers from her hometown. It was in the summer of 2012, along the sun-kissed shores of Byron Bay in Australia. With its magnificent beaches and dynamic surf culture, this beach town has always been a haven for most surfers searching for that ultimate wave. The coastline of golden sands and rolling surf, with its breathtaking beauty, curved between green hills and the clear waters of the Pacific Ocean. Older surfers like Jake Finnegan had caught many waves crashing against the beaches for years. He was held in high regard within the ranks of locals down at the beach as a handy surfer who never really stressed too much about anything. But beneath this confident exterior, the unpredictability of the ocean and the hidden dangers beneath its waves gave Jake a healthy dose of respect. The sun had barely risen that morning and everything at the waterfront was warm. The waves were ideal, rolling in with a steady rhythm that promised an exhilarating session. Jake paddled out, feeling that familiar tingle of excitement accompanying the anticipation of catching a great wave. The salty breeze tousled his hair, and he sighed contentment as he settled onto his board, his eyes scanning the horizon for the next set. As he hung there, Jake suddenly saw that something moving beneath broke the water's surface. He shrugged at the thought of a school of fish or perhaps a playful dolphin, and then his concentration clinched as something much darker slid beneath him. A bull shark, maybe the most powerful predator in the ocean, cut through with grace beneath him. A wave of unease washed over him as he realized what it was. Jake had heard stories about aggressive bull sharks and enjoying salt and fresh water. They were not the type of creatures to trifle with. He had always been very wary of them, but with the shark circling beneath his board, he felt an involuntary tension tighten in his chest. He remembered everything that older, experienced surfers had told him about encountering sharks. The very first rule in the book was not to panic and make any undue, radical motions. Panicking draws attention. Jake took a deep breath, reminding himself that he wasn't a rookie. He'd surfed through a lot worse conditions than this. Feeling the shark approach closer, Jake's heart raced as he caught sight of its dorsal fin slicing through the water. It was as if he had been told again personally how this ocean could act. He had learned it many times before, but had never faced it so directly. He swam back in another arc, deliberate and calculated. Jake bounced at the shoulders to keep his balance and maintained his cool head intact. The board seemed flimsy between him and the predator. He started paddling into shore with smooth, fluid motions. Each stroke felt like a gamble, an attempt to outsmart the creature lurking beneath him. The shark was closer and closer with every passing moment, its dark silhouette cutting through the clear water. Jake could see its eyes, glinting with a predator's curiosity. He willed himself not to turn his head, as the slightest splash or erratic movement could provoke a reaction. Instead, he zeroed in on the shoreline where waves crashed rhythmically against the sand, each wave a reminder of safety. The vastness of the ocean was racing through Jake's mind. He remembered stories of surfers who had fallen into similar situations. Some of them got out unscathed, while others didn't have the same luck. But he wasn't going to become another cautionary tale. He needed to keep calm to not excite the shark into thinking he was a threat or a particular prey. He paddled, and with each stroke he felt his heart pounding with adrenaline and his body shaking with fear. Moments before exhilaration, he now turned to stand off. He realized the ocean, which he loved so much, had potential danger. He had always respected the power of waves, yet he stumbled upon a different type of power, alive, aware. It didn't stop circling, and its movements were now more pronounced. Jake knew he had to decide on what to do. The shore was still a reasonable distance away, and the shark needed to give him a clear way through. He considered making a break for it, but was aware that sudden movements were quite dangerous. Determined, Jake began paddling at a smooth, increased pace, enough to indicate he was headed back to shore. He remembered that bull sharks were often bored by prey that showed confidence. His strokes were rhythmic, calculated, and deliberate. The sun glinted off the water, and suddenly Jake felt something. It was as if the waves were speaking to him, telling him about the two of them, that it would be all right, that together they would make this work. He would not turn back because he was afraid. Jake was a surfer. Just when he was about to be overwhelmed, the shark veered off and disappeared into the water depths. Jake's heart rushed with relief. The tension gripped him began to ease, though he knew better than to let his guard down. He kept paddling steadily, not relenting until he hit the shallows. Closer to the shore, Jake felt sand under his feet and stood up, looking back at the water, half expecting the shark to return. It was gone. He was left with adrenaline and thankfulness, having come out whole after facing his fear. It reminded him of the respect he must repay to the ocean and its creatures. As soon as he was ashore, he sat down on the beach, his breathing heavy, the adrenaline still in his body from the encounter. He saw the waves smashing against the beach, the beauty of the ocean contrasting with the tension that had settled. That was surfing, the exhilarating dance with nature, at times joyful but dangerous. Jake knew this was a moment he would never forget. It served as a gut-wrenching reminder that the ocean was not a playground, but a wild, unpredictable force. He had always known the risks, but now they seemed more real than ever. He walked back up the beach knowing he'd pass on his experience to fellow surfers, really hammering home how important awareness and respect for the ocean's other inhabitants were. In the summer of 2010, the jagged coastline of the Algarve in Portugal, an exuberant and diversified marine ecosystem, lay in emerald waters. The Algarve coast is known for outstanding cliffs and secret beaches. Honestly, nothing more than an aquatic paradise. Once a site where ancient seafarers and explorers lived, the place turned full of travelers and marine biology enthusiasts. Among them was Maria Thompson, a University of Lisbon student in her final year of marine biology, eager to study the coastal area's outstanding marine biodiversity. One sunny afternoon, Maria prepared her scuba diving equipment and set off from a small boat anchored near Praia da Marinha, one of the most beautiful beaches in the world. The sun shimmered on the ocean's surface, and the rhythmic sound of the waves embraced the shores. With an underwater notebook in hand and brimming with enthusiasm, she finally dived into the cool, inviting water to witness the undersea marvels. She lay on her back, viewing the school of colorful fish zipping around her, mainly parrotfish. Sea turtles silently swam past. Every view seemed to wrap around her heart more with its beautiful colors. She made notes of the different species she came across, and her brain was running so fast, excited about how to present the results to her classmates. Slowly, the tranquil setting surrounding the boat shifted as she moved off. The water, a clear invitation in translucency, had lost its clarity a little, and indeed in the air there was growing something of an edgy tenseness. Maria felt excited, to the point of fear, but forging ahead ever more, wanting to look and see for herself ahead of her. She had read about the odd creatures in these waters, but what would come next could never have been foreseen. The sharp sting just erupted on her leg. Maria gasped, instinctively reaching down to assess the pain. She had swum into the tentacles of a Portuguese man-o-war, a creature often mistaken for a jellyfish but far more dangerous. Panic surged through her as the evil tendrils wound around her leg, each further movement enhancing the stinging sensation. At first, she was in shock, but it quickly turned into desperation. Maria's heart pumped from the pain that was set throughout her body. It was just about to be paralyzed. She tried to float, but in her head she thought of getting back to her boat. The energetic underwater world started to blur in a race against her emergency. Maria started to kick her legs with all her might, trying to swim away from the clutches of this being. Every stretch of her body gave her aches, but the survival instinct led her on. She remembered the training for first aid when she was told one has to be excellent to handle the situation smoothly. However, the incredible pain hardly left a chance to make it possible to think clearly. Fighting the waves with every stroke, Maria looked down the water, trying to catch a glimpse of her boat, a little speck bobbing at a distance. It seemed a long way off, the irony of safety just a reach away. Her gasps for air became shallow as she tried to fight every wave, yet each stroke seemed insurmountable. The sun, once friendly, seemed now a dire spotlight on her plight. In those seconds of desperate panic, by some form of grotesque irony, Maria's mind reeled through all the lessons. The Portuguese man-o-war, the deadliest beauty of evolution. Its grace, the way it floated on the surface of the water, and its transparent body was a marvel itself. Still, its tentacles could preside enough of a sting to render a small fish helpless. She admired its beauty from a distance, but now she was face to face with the reality of power. With great resolve, Maria struggled farther away from the animal. It felt like it was in the process of sinking back, retracting most of its tentacles as she swam to her boat. Each stroke fought against the burning in her leg, the venom coursing through her veins, a constant reminder of her earlier misstep. She could feel the waves pounding against her, shouting for the action of pushing harder. Her striving muscles threatened to give way at the last as she inched forward the final yards towards the boat. Though the prospect of her gear, security, drove on. Maria grasped the ship's side, her fingers trembling as she pulled herself up. She dropped onto the deck, gasping for air when she got on board. The boat's captain, an older man named Pedro, saw that she was in distress. He hurried to Maria's side to assess the situation. Pain ran through her leg, and Maria could not articulate the question of what was happening. Her words stumbled on her lips, but Pedro, who had the experience of such a situation, took charge. He grabbed the first aid kit and his hands sought to scrub her bite and apply a cold compress. The pain began to lessen with each passing minute, though the feeling remained. Maria understood that her quiet moment in the study had led to something so life-threatening. She had to battle to survive, get tested on endurance, and be pushed to test further her knowledge of the ocean and sea creatures she fell in love with. While Pedro took care of Maria's injuries, she thought of nature's duality, the beauty and danger interwoven in the belly of the ocean. She came to study marine life but instead learned a valuable lesson: respect and caution in the presence of such. The Portuguese man-o-war, so beautiful yet deadly, made an excellent example of dangers not easily seen in the world's waters. She had a few hours of respite, and the multitude of the experience had already begun to dissolve into her body's general soreness. However, the memory would remain indelible in her mind. The surface of the ocean out front was once again serene and inviting. She suddenly felt full of willpower. Maria was a marine biologist, so she was clear that her work was not only about admiration, but also about understanding and helping other people understand the aquatic system. The sun began to set behind them, its light turning the water into gold in their wake. Maria and Pedro rowed the vessel back toward the shore of the quiet ocean. She was grateful yet humbled. The sea had only given her an inkling of its magnificence and its danger, and that was a balance that she was eager to step forward into. Maria's near-death experience triggered a drive in her to take up marine safety and conservation awareness. She organized workshops for people to know her story and related knowledge concerning some dangerous marine creatures. Her experience transformed from a personal battle to a broader mission of awareness about hidden dangers in the ocean. Standing on the beach sands with curious listeners was a fulfilling moment for Maria. Now, inspired by an ocean that had threatened her, she knew the world under the waves was beautiful and treacherous. and now it was her job to help others get around safely. All in all, Maria Thompson would soon be considered a learner and an ambassador of ocean awareness studies. Her experience with the Portuguese man-o-war was life-defining. It reminded her that every creature deserved respect and understanding, no matter how mesmerizing. The ocean, with all its mysteries, continued to call her, and she was ready to answer. It was the summer of 2002. Kodiak Island, Alaska, had a rugged coastline that was as beautiful as it was deadly. At the moment, it was a busy fishing community, with old fishermen like Joe Cannon's livelihood dependent upon the fickle harvest of the ocean to feed families. Joe Cannon had been a man of the sea all his life. His hands showed it, witnessing all his years wrestling with the elements. He had seen his share of storms and strange encounters beneath the waves, but nothing could have prepared him for what was in store. With the sun shining bright this morning on the deep blue waters, its rays dancing upon, Joe set out early in the morning aboard his sturdy vessel, the Seahawk. Accompanied by his loyal crew of Mark and Clara, Joe felt an optimistic mood, with them ready to cast their nets into the depths. As they glided across the sparkling waters, Joe recalled the colorful history of Kodiak. He spoke of his father, who had passed down fishing techniques and a deep respect for the sea. Joe had learned that the ocean was both a provider and a fierce adversary, and he grew up treating it with the reverence it deserved. For hours of fishing, finally, that tug on the net was familiar. Excitement filled the air as they began to haul in their catch, but resistance was met. The taut net was developing, and an odd heaviness had settled over the boat. Joe squinted into the sun, his eyes attempting to discern what lay beneath the surface. It suddenly became apparent. A giant octopus was caught in the net, its tentacles flailing wildly. Joe felt a jolt of panic, wondering at the size of whatever they had caught. He had never seen such a big thing, its massive form twisting and turning, each tentacle strong enough to crush equipment on the boat. Mark, always a bit of a wag, was trying to lighten things up. He said they would be famous for catching a legendary sea monster. However, the laughter was soon stifled as the octopus thrashed about and tightened its grip on the net, threatening to drag the Seahawk under. Joe signaled the crew to hold steady. The battle was on. They had to let that octopus loose without putting themselves and that boat in danger. Clara, as calm as ever, suggested they should use a gaff hook to pry those tentacles off the net. Joe nodded. She had a head on his shoulders where all else was crazy. With every tug to set the creature free, the octopus retaliated with full force. The tentacles seized the boat's motor and reverberated against its hull. Joe could feel his adrenaline pumping in his struggle to keep control as the sea roared around them, waves crashing up the boat's sides, the powerful forces of nature opposing them. The battle dragged on. Joe knew that muscle power wasn't going to accomplish this one. He was going to have to outsmart the creature. He remembered reading about fishermen who had gone through similar struggles and had won by patience and strategy, not force. He told Mark to circle slowly back and forth, trying to dizzy the octopus and shake its grasp. Clara did her best with the gaff hook, working hard to move the tentacles. Each limb could be free, carefully, nicely, with one motion, and another would wrap somewhere else. It was as if the creature knew what they were trying to do, thrashing harder in resistance, its powerful limbs snapping with an almost sentient determination. Time dripped away as they worked against the tide. Exhaustion settled in, but Joe felt his resolve surge. He thought about the family back home waiting for him and the community that relied on what the ocean yielded. He tried to convince Clara to target the spear at the base of the octopus's head, the most vulnerable part, as this was his last resort. She rammed the creature with perfect execution. It wavered in indecision momentarily. Joe and Mark seized the opportunity, pulling at the net with great force. With one final heave, they finally freed the octopus from the entanglement. It paused a moment, evidently dazed, and then with one powerful surge it slipped back into the ocean's depths, leaving behind a battered net and a sense of awe. Breathless and wide-eyed, they gave a moment of pause to digest what had just happened. The deep oceans gave them a monster, and they prevailed at a cost. The boat marred, the net in tatters, but they were safe. Joe leaned over the side of the ship, watching the waves settle, a mix of emotions swirling within. As they chugged back into Kodiak, the sun began to set, throwing a warm, golden light across the water. No word was spoken as the crew sat silently, each lost in thought. Joe felt a newfound respect for the ocean and all its creatures. He knew now that fishing didn't only have to do with the catch, it was about one's relation with nature and its problems. After docking, Joe told the other fishermen at the harbor their story. Their tale about battling the giant octopus quickly became a tale that everybody repeated to each other and became a local legend. It reminded one of the sea's unrelenting nature and the strength needed to face its challenges. Over the next few days, Joe and his crew repaired the Seahawk. Their respect for one another was much more vigorous since they had shared a common experience. They set out to sea again, wiser but bolder, knowing that the ocean would always hold its mysteries and surprises. That giant octopus not only tested their skills, but also taught them the great lesson of humility and respect toward the natural world. Contemplating as he stared across the horizon, Joe knew he would always fish, embracing both the thrill and the unpredictability that came with it, forever changed by his encounter with the deep-sea giant.